Good afternoon, and thanks for the warm welcome. Is this audible? So as Curtis mentioned, it's an exciting place to be. I think it's a delight to be here in New Orleans, and I'm grateful for the invitation to share some of the things that get me all fired up today, and also for the wonderful hospitality that we've all been able to enjoy. Is the sound okay? Okay. So as Curtis mentioned, I have several affiliations, but across those different positions, I work on the same kinds of things. I look at curriculum development, teacher professional development, and the supportive roles that technology can play in each of these or in putting these things together. And this means that I spend a lot of time designing, which is something that I really enjoy doing. And that ranges from designing cutting-edge technologies for use in modern classrooms to very simple, low-to-the-ground use of basic technologies like text messaging to support rural villager workers or preschool teachers like the one that you see on this picture here. My passion for design has a long history. I come from a family of educators, and I think one of the things that, as part of my upbringing and certainly part of my professional career, has been a really keen interest in not just becoming exposed to interesting ideas or cool widgets and tools, but to finding ways to really make meaningful change on the ground. And it's that kind of work that I would like to share with you today. So the conference flyer says it. We are here to engage in this multidisciplinary forum and to exchange information. And during this session, the kind of information I would like to exchange with you, and I do hope we have time for exchange at the end of the session, that we can have some conversation, relates especially to the idea of integrating research and development in the applications concerning e-learning, and designing and realizing and implementing e-learning. So this means looking at the role of research in design, for design, and also through design. Maybe it's worth taking a moment, though, to just define what I mean by e-learning, and who are the designers who actually create e-learning. There are many people who participate in design, even though not everybody who I would view as a designer would necessarily view themselves as a designer, because they wear often multiple hats. But in my mind, this includes software developers, or technology developers. It includes researchers, but it also includes teachers to a large extent. And when I talk about design, I'm not just talking about making the stuff. Of course, the tools are interesting and important, but it's more than that. And designing for change on the ground means not only creating the tools that we use, but the processes and the mechanisms upon which they will be built that are where a vision for use is founded on a realistic and well-articulated theory of change. The kinds of things that we use might include ebooks or readers. They might include software. They could include learning environments which are fully or maybe just partially integrated with technology. They could also include pathways, for example, to teacher professional development. Here, too, technology may play a supportive role, but it's not the centerpiece always. There are many ways and many models for designing learning and instruction, but there aren't that many that actually explicitly focus on integration of research. But this is rather important, I think, and that's the thesis of my message today. It's important because integration of research into development yields robust and well-informed designs. It's increasingly important given our current stage of accountability. Our society now is growing increasingly, and I think justifiably also, concerned with evidence-informed practices. Research-based design, or at least research-informed design, can speak to that. So today, what I'd like to discuss are some thoughts about two particular approaches to design that really work hard to integrate the processes of R&D, more so than others. One is called research-based design, or RBD, and the other one is called design-based research, or DBR. They both, research-based design and design-based research, both share the same phases of analysis, design, and evaluation, and they're integrated and iterative, and there are many commonalities across the two, but their outputs are quite different. So this also implies that there are different relationships with research throughout the entire process. In research-based design, the focus is purely on the iterative development of solutions to problems that can be implemented in practice. In contrast to that, educational design research has twin goals. In addition to the pursuit of solutions that can address real problems, educational design research is also aiming explicitly at deriving theoretical understanding that can inform the work of other people, outside the development or context or the target setting where the design is going to be used. So this means that there are some overlaps, but also some differences in what the final outputs are of each approach. So in research-based design, there are many different kinds of things that can come out: educational programs, processes, products, even policies to facilitate the use of programs, processes, or products. In contrast, or in addition, I would actually say, design-based research aims to do this, but at the same time has that additional goal of wanting to develop theoretical understanding that can be informative for the work of others. So this is understanding that can be used for different purposes, right? To describe, explain, predict, or even manipulate phenomena in the real world. So that could include teaching, learning, motivation, self-regulation. All of these relate to the process or the processes or the products of design. Both of these approaches feature research, and quite prominently, and both of these approaches feature integrated research, integrated R&D. But because they're striving towards different outcomes, the processes tend to look a little bit not exactly the same. The relationship with research is different between the RBD and DBR. And I think it's important to untie these to be able to choose what am I working on and to act accordingly. It's also a lot easier to integrate research into design or into design-based research. It's easier to say that we're going to do that than it actually is to do that. Anyone who's worked in a development team knows that the timescales of developers and the timescales of researchers are often poorly aligned. And there's also a lack of alignment between research and development activities due to maybe denial. So we get results from an evaluation back and we just don't want to believe them. It happens. Sometimes it's due to omission. Maybe there's no time, no budget, no personnel, no expertise to do the thoughtful, considered steps that we would ideally do if we had other options available. Sometimes research and design is not integrated in ways that you see. There are maybe some front-end analysis that has taken place, or if it did, though, it wasn't of a high enough quality to really take into consideration during design. Or maybe some of the evaluations that are conducted could better be labeled as quasi-evaluations because they're really more to justify what was done than they are to actually inform decision-making or ways forward. In the remainder of this session, what I would like to do is share with you some considerations on balancing the relationship, which is, like I said, much easier said than done, between research and development in these two approaches. And so I'd like to look at RBD and DBR and think about which might be the cart and which might be the horse, given certain situations. To talk a little bit more about ramifications of the similarities and differences that I already mentioned, and then to think about the affordances, limitations, and synergies of these different processes. So, which is horse and which is cart? Let's start with what's what. In my experience, it's kind of like beauty. It's in the eye of the beholder. So researchers tend to think that it's all about the research, and practitioners and developers tend to think it's all about the tools or the designs. And That's sensible, it's understandable. It also makes things a little bit complicated when you're working in teams where goals and values and ways to move forward need to be negotiated. And so there are certain consequences of these differing kinds of views in teams. And let's take a little look at that. Some of the consequences can be positive, some maybe less so. From a strategic standpoint, being able to separate out horse and cart can actually work out pretty well. I have here some examples on the screen of some projects that I admire very much, where different groups have been able to pull the cart using funding from different sources. So, for example, the Seeds of Science, Roots of Reading curriculum, which is a widely used curriculum in 50 states here in the US for elementary school science and literacy that are integrated. Those developers decided that they needed to do something to invigorate their product and also their design processes, and they turned to research, not only for funding to get the job done, but also to improve the quality of their internal process. And so they have NSF grants and grants from the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation to refine their already outstanding products. So the research here is trailing, but it's serving a wonderful purpose in the development work. On the other hand, you've got products like a very famous example from some decades ago is the Jasper Woodbury series for learning mathematics, video-based vignettes that help students connect to mathematics learning in ways that are very realistic and relevant to kids in secondary schools. In this particular example, it was more research, researchers and research money driving what was actually done, and that also had a lot of implications for the way the projects panned out. On the other hand, you see people who want to engage in integrated research and design, looking for routes through practical sources of financing. And I'm not saying that financing is the only thing that matters here, of course, but it does have a big say in what we are actually able to do. So, for example, the Jump In project, which is a project in the Netherlands, is a project where researchers in the fields of health and education teamed up, and they had money from a local city to develop interventions and implement them. And it was the funding for, public funding for health and phys ed of children that was able to feed their work. So there's a couple of examples here. That there are also, those are some implications and some consequences of looking at strategic alignment or between research and development goals. Money being one, of course, other resources, the human resources, the temporal resources, the material resources, they matter as well. Another consequence for thinking about the integration of research and design is the process. I love this model, which took me a while to learn to embrace it because it sort of blew my mind when I first saw it, but I've begun to get a sense of it. It's by some Danish colleagues, and what you do when you look at the model is look kind of in the middle where it says problem, and it shows the cycles of research and development starting from the same point of departure, the problem, and then working in parallel out this like this. So if you could imagine the wheels turning, it will go like this. And I think they did a brilliant job of conceptualizing how these processes can be parallel and yet separate. And on the one hand, I like the fact that they make things so transparent. On the other hand, in reading the book chapter in which this model was presented, they were very brave, I think, and said that this is the ideal model. In real life, we've never done a project where it worked like this. We've done projects where it went like this, and in all different kinds of ways, but the sequence is never as pretty as it is when we draw pictures of it. We also know that to be true with our research reports and many other things. That is the way of it. But I think it's important to note that there are potential ways to align things, and if it's not done carefully, as these people have indicated, it can get out of sync very easily. Another consequence of considering research or development, one to be the horse and one to be the cart, could be related to the outcomes. There might be, if there are tensions in what are the main goals and what are the supporting goals, then that leads to different ideas about when pressures are tight, when money is tight, or time is tight, or a production schedule has to be adhered to, and we have to cut back. Well, maybe cutting back on research rigor would be the priority of some in a team, and maybe cutting back on development detail would be a priority for some others. And so there are some in some ways, having to innovate can certainly lead to very productive tensions. My mother used to call that hybrid vigor, where you have different ideas coming together to really bring forth something new and inspiring. And at the same time, it could be quite draining and painful if not resolved within a reasonable time. Another important consideration in terms of what actually influences the outcomes if research and development are not integrated closely has to do with the different reward systems of the individuals that could be participating in design teams. So in most of the design projects that I've been involved in, it's not just people from one domain, from like academia or industry or school practice, but usually there's partners from different organizations. And again, that has many affordances. At the same time, different organizations have their own reward systems. So where I work, at my multiple institutions, they're pretty big on journal articles and scientific output. And as a preschool teacher, I'm pretty big on making change on the ground. And I'm not saying my university doesn't appreciate that, they certainly do, but it weighs in differently for that organization as opposed to, for example, the teacher who feels accountable for making sure that her students do well on the national exams, or the trainer who feels accountable for making sure that his learners are able to implement new technologies in ways that make sense for the business, and so on. So there are varying expectations about outcomes. This can lead to varying priorities in pursuing those outcomes. And it works, generally speaking, I think it works better when those have been negotiated early on and explicitly within a team, and that can happen when research and development are well integrated. So I think that to conclude my argument about why I think research and development need to be integrated, I think that the horse and cart mindset can be very helpful from a strategic standpoint, especially for obtaining funding, and in the short term, that's lovely. But in the long term, separated processes can be informative, but maybe insufficient for building theory or creating robust design. And I think that the focus on different kinds of goals, which is in part brought in, made clear by the different reward systems of different parties involved, can risk exacerbating the tensions that already exist. So I think that integrated research and development can yield greater benefits, and I'm hoping that you're here, at least in part, because you think that's not a completely crazy idea. Some of the potential benefits I see to be on the flip side. Strategically, by integrating R&D, we demonstrate added value for researchers and for developers and to other practitioners. I think that robust design and research processes can help sensitize researchers, for example, to the realities of developers or of practitioners. Also, I think that when you've got research and development practices that are integrated, especially when they involve practitioners on design and development teams, that can help to sensitize practitioners in a way that inculcates ownership, and that can be facilitating for implementation and sustaining innovation. Consequences of integrated R&D can, for the final product, I think that if we have integrated processes, especially with members of a design team who understand, accept, and live the day-to-day of the target implementation context, we can develop designs and also create research findings that are ecologically valid. And I think that this stands to increase the quality of the designs themselves and also the research, for having potential impact on practice. So what might an integrated process look like? There are many ways to roam, of course, and what I'd like to do now is present a model which my good friend and colleague Tom Reeves and I cooked up together as the backbone of a book that we recently published. This model is based on scientific insights from the fields of curriculum and instruction and also software design and a couple of others. And it also aims to explicitly blend both analytic and creative approaches to design. The starting point for the model is problems in practice. Like I said earlier, both research-based design and design-based research are fundamentally concerned with creating productive change on the ground. And so that's where we start with our model. There are a little bit of differences, though. In research-based design, the main audience for the work are users, clients. This could include educators or learners, but it's mostly those that are within the innovation system. And in contrast to that, design-based research has the additional audience of practitioners and researchers that are, tend to be further outside the innovation system. In both cases, a first step tends to be the identification and analysis of problems in practice upon which to focus the activity. So here, an attempt is made to understand the problem, its root causes, the concerns of those people who are involved. It also means beginning to look at the room for maneuverability, what I like to think of as the jurisdiction of change. You know, what's within the purview of this project and what is just too big for us to tackle. And beginning to look at the affordances and constraints within a situation that might lend themselves well to being used or mitigated during design. So at the same time, there's a kind of an exploration, more open-ended, that takes place where we go looking for how other people have tackled this kind of thing in other situations and with what kinds of results. In research-based design, this process is largely informal. And while scientific literature may be used, it tends to be more limited than in design-based research. But in sound research-based design, there will be some evidence-informed framing of the problem, and that will be used, for example, to gather data to understand the problem better. In design-based research, where you have an explicit goal of also generating relevant, usable, theoretical understanding that other people can benefit from, the way one looks at the analysis and exploration phase is different. Not necessarily fundamentally different, but I would say that the rigor and the detail that one seeks in order to really understand the problem is more intense. And this could range from all the different kinds of insights one needs to begin to understand a problem and develop solutions. And this kind of understanding that we seek in this phase can be useful for design, but like I said, at each stage, we're also looking at generating usable knowledge. So doing a study to understand kindergarten teachers' attitudes towards technology use for early literacy is something that can inform design and at the same time be valuable in its own right if it's conducted well enough. So the frameworks that are used to study the problem situation and the context tend to be more robust, heavily based on literature, and that's a little bit different from research-based design. Typically a second phase in both processes is design and construction, and this is where we have ideation, so beginning to think about possibilities, generating ideas, weighing off alternatives, checking which ones will actually make sense, thinking through if they are feasible for the given problem and context, and the development of prototypes, which tend to mature over time. In research-based design, this process is largely determined by existing organizational practices, What have the people in this organization done before, which is a very fine place to start. I'm not knocking that. And what about what expertise is available on a particular design team? So what is the repertoire of the designers that are involved? Those are two things that play a determinant role in what the design process actually looks like. Whereas in design-based research, there's an explicit focus on looking out at the big wide world and inventorying what's already known and how are we going to make a contribution that has an added value above and beyond what's already known. And so this has to do with looking through literature that can help frame up a design that's sound. So if you take, for example, technology for teacher professional development, there's an awful lot that we already know, and there's an awful lot that we can build on. There's an awful lot in terms of do's, and probably way lots more in terms of don'ts. And I'm not saying that research-based design would ignore those, but design-based research will take those and use them in a much more systematic and thorough way, typically. We use design principles for, in research-based design or in design-based research, we might be using existing design principles. For example, principles on how to shape authentic e-learning tasks in higher education. This could be the result of a design-based research study, and it could certainly feed into future efforts on research-based design or design-based research. Another step, another core process in design-based research and research-based design has to do with when the ideas and prototypes of interventions begin to take shape. They're tested, and we reflect upon them. And this process typically feeds back into design, and the iterations and cycles of development are common to both processes. In research-based design, the evaluation and reflection phase tends to be shorter, and the emphasis is primarily on formative evaluation, occasionally also on what I mentioned earlier, the quasi-evaluation, where we're really just doing the evaluation to justify that the money was spent or the time was spent or so on. But in design-based research, the evaluation tends to be quite rigorous and a bit more formal. It also is based on some very sound theoretical grounding, and the findings of the work are not only relevant to design, but also useful for other people tackling similar challenges in similar kinds of settings. As mentioned previously, a key difference between design-based research and research-based design has to do with the outcomes that they aim to produce. There's some overlap, but also some differences. So in research-based design, we're primarily aiming towards an intervention, which, as you see here, may start off as an idea, as a first prototype, and gradually, through different passes through this model, and there's many ways to pass through it, it will mature over time. And that is also true of design-based research, but at the same time, this is a process that aims explicitly for developing theoretical understanding simultaneously. So, what does this look like in the real world? There are many examples that I would have loved to share today, and I had to pick. And so I hope you like the choices, and if not, well, maybe we'll have time to discuss other ones later on. But I think it's helpful to take two examples and begin to think about what a lovely model that has nice square boxes actually looks like in the messy world. So one example I'd like to give you is a research-based design example, and that has to do with creating communities to advance workplace learning. And the design-based research example I would like to share with you is got to do with it was the development of an electronic performance support system, which is actually a rather old study, but I mention it today because the work is still relevant to the topic, but also because I'm excited. It's one of those old projects that had its own life, we thought it was over, and is now getting reincarnated in a different context with different users, and maybe we'll have a chance to talk about that. So for each of these, I'd like to just briefly mention the nature of the project, what the core processes of analysis, design, and evaluation actually look like in these projects, and what the main outcomes were. So The Technologies for Workplace Learning project had the main goal of working to improve the alignment of workplace learning with the school setting and tertiary learning. We worked with 6 teams of intern, and each team had an intern mentor, so people from the workplace, and they're in different sectors. So people from the educational sector, that would be teachers from the workplace. From the economics sector, we had small businesses and bankers. And we also had a technique, I don't know if that's the right translation, but a technical sector, which had people from businesses that do woodworking and another one that does Philips. You know, Philips, I don't know how to describe Philips, the giant company that produces all kinds of technologies. And we had mentors intern mentors from the workplace, and also the school-based mentors working together in teams, tackling the problem of improving the connection, or if you want to go half empty, dealing with the gap between the school-based learning and the work-based learning. And what we did with these teams is ask them to understand their own situation, look at root causes of the misalignment between workplace learning and school-based learning, and begin to develop solutions to not the entire problem, because that was beyond the scope of our project, but to some of the big causes that they thought were responsible for the problem, and begin to chip away at those one at a time. So basically we had 6 innovation teams from the sectors of education, technique, and business. And what we did was we facilitated each of these teams in the creation of their innovations through technology-based materials. And we also gave them resources and workshops and coaching. So across the process of developing our research-based innovation, and there's 2 layers to the onion here. Doing this for our project was a research-based innovation, and at the same time, we were encouraging the participants to develop their own research-based innovation. One of the first things that popped up as a big red flag, and it was predictable, but the extent of it was still shocking for a lot of participants, was the fact that there's different agendas, different people in these teams were small. There were 4 to 6 people in a team. So 2 or 3 people from the workplace and 2 or 3 people from the school. You would think that that's fairly nimble, but it wasn't. There were differences between, you know, were you from school or were you from the workplace, but the bigger differences were, of course, across those 2 contexts, and the values, the reward systems, and the priorities in each group. It was identified early on that they were quite difficult to negotiate, and one team basically broke up, but they got back together and moved forward in the end. So I guess what I want to emphasize here is that taking time to articulate that and to accommodate that was very important. During the design, and one of the ways that we did that was through taking inventory not only with the people that were on the teams, but also sending them back to their own institutions for a reality check with their colleagues. And very often we found out that the people who were on these design teams were much more flexible and yielding than their colleagues, and so they would come back to the table and say, I know we thought of this, and I know we thought of that, but it's not going to fly, so we have to rethink this. So during design and construction, I would say that the design activities ranging from ideation to initial mapping of what the interventions were going to look like was all done face-to-face. And then the process of developing and constructing the prototypes was a mixture of face-to-face, online, offline work. We facilitated that through apps that we had downloaded and populated with specific information for them on iPads that they received as part of this project, also through a dedicated website, and some encouragement using social media. The evaluation and reflection phase of this project focused a lot on ownership by colleagues. As we had discovered earlier on, the people in the design teams tended to be more motivated and flexible than everybody else back at their own institutions. So a lot of the evaluation work looked at what needed to be done to initiate and maintain buy-in in the different institutions. Another focus of the evaluation work was on looking at actual results. Are we meeting our goals? Are we closing the gap? And ultimately, is this contributing to improved student learning, or at least improved student outcomes? Some groups looked more at motivational issues and interests and enjoyability of learning, and others looked more at grades and outcomes on exams. But the design teams across the board found the assessment of outcomes extremely challenging, and I don't blame them. It's real hard stuff. But they did. Here they are on the day that they got their iPads. They don't look as happy as they were, actually, but that was while they were negotiating some serious tension. But in the end, we have some happy results to report. We have 6 locally driven research-informed interventions. We're still gathering the data on actual effectiveness, but so far perceived value is quite high, and we're optimistic. We also have developed technology resources and also sort of a repertoire of tools that we can use with other teams. So these are definitely reusable. Okay, let's talk a little bit about a design-based research example. We're going to switch settings from higher education in the Netherlands, higher education / business sector in the Netherlands, and now we're going to Southern Africa, where we're talking about the development of a tool, an electronic performance support system to support curriculum developers in creating paper-based lesson materials. So essentially teacher guides that accompany a textbook. And this was a project that survived on or was fueled by the iterative development of software. It was informed by research, and as a design-based research project, it also had the explicit goal of producing theoretical understanding for use by others. During the analysis and exploration phase of the study, a lot of attention was paid to the state of practice. So we were fairly well aware of the state of art of, at this particular time, computer software that was available. But in that particular context, the state of the art was not relevant. The state of practice was much more important. So we looked at the technologies that were available, the technologies that we thought would be likely available in the next 5 years in the teacher resource centers where we were working across Namibia, Botswana, Swaziland, South Africa, Lesotho, Tanzania, and so on. We also looked at the state of practice, not just with regard to the technology, but also with regard to curriculum developer practices. What do they already do? And what do they want to maybe do differently? What do they like about what they're already doing? And with both parts of state of practice, so looking at the technology, but also looking at the human-based technologies, and we wanted to make sure that the innovation leap, we wanted to make sure that what we took was an innovation jump that everybody could make, and not an innovation leap that would leave too many people lagging behind. And so we chose our focus, and we chose our technology based heavily on what we thought would be a reasonable jump within what I have written about elsewhere as the zone of proximal implementation. During this process, we also paid attention to what we thought would be their most urgent needs and wants, not only because we want to make a difference, but also because we know that if we don't tap into what people feel is the most necessary for their daily survival, we're not going to have much of a shot at uptake and actual use. So we definitely attended to those in our design, studied them carefully in an analysis phase, and then attended to those in our design. The design and construction phase was, I would call it user-centered. I had the good fortune with a background as a preschool teacher to get trained as a software developer and learn how to program stuff. Thank goodness there's nice systems out there called like Authorware and other icon-based systems that allow people like me who are not expertise, who don't have that kind of expertise to still jump in and play the game. This enabled some, I wouldn't call it rapid, but I call it semi-rapid prototyping. So throughout the course of several years, different prototypes were then developed and tested with the target users in the target setting using a combination of mixed methods. Across the years, there were 510 respondents from 15 different countries, and the kinds of evaluation data that were collected on each of the different prototypes ranged from sit down, one-on-one, and walk through the prototype and give me lots of qualitative feedback, to also including more quantitative stuff. There was also a little bit of quasi-experimental design in the final round, looking at comparing how users of the system performed without the computer as opposed to with the computer. The products of this study were exactly what you would expect from a design-based research study. You have a system, so a tool for use in the real world that attends to or is meant to address practical problems, and at the same time, theoretical understanding that can inform the work of others. So there's some examples here of the various books and book chapters and journal articles. It's not complete, but this gives an impression of the kinds of publications that resulted from this work. So let's think a little bit about what these approaches can mean. What are the affordances, what are the drawbacks, and where might things, the research-based design and design-based research, be synergistic? For one thing, I think that tightly integrated design and research trajectories allow us to meet our goals in sustainable ways. And I certainly have experienced that oftentimes unforeseen benefits come along the way. A big one being, for example, the teacher professional development that can result from being involved on a design team, whether that design is more reactionary or proactive. There are many opportunities to make more change than might initially have been intended. There are opportunities for collaborations between education, industry, and academia. There are very few projects that I've been involved in where these processes are integrated tightly that do not have some border crossing happening, which can be complicated, but usually in the end, the net's positive, makes it worth it. Doing this can yield all kinds of new opportunities. One of the ones that I think of that jumps to my mind especially is the use of agile approaches in curriculum design. So having become familiar with techniques like Scrum, for example, to do some rapid and very user-centered design for software, we begin to think about the implications of that for creating other kinds of things which might be technology-based or technology-supported, but maybe aren't necessarily. And so bringing on different kinds of expertise and crashing that together can have some very powerful affordances. At the same time, we need to be realistic about the limitations and I think accept them, because that will enable us to confront them head on and actually work towards resolution, as opposed to staying in denial and freaking out when things don't pan out. And the big ones there have to do with the tensions between the stakeholders, like I mentioned earlier, especially with regard to different priorities, different goals, different reward systems, basically wanting to get different things out of the enterprise. Another one is just got to do with the resources. It takes an awful lot of time. It takes money. It takes expertise to integrate these processes well. It's not for the faint-hearted at all. Some situations may simply render it unfeasible, but I think it's worth trying for in most cases. I think there might also be some synergies if we think about the different orientations or mindsets behind design-based research and research-based design. I like to imagine that some of the development expertise coming from research-based design might begin to inform design-based research in ways that we haven't thought about yet. And I think I mentioned earlier the idea of principles that come out of design-based research, so design principles that can guide the process of design or inform what the products of design ought to look like, could be usable certainly in research-based design. So how do we take these ideas forward? I think a key thing is to accept that integration is difficult and to commit to doing it anyway and to face those challenges head on, doing one's best to use rigorous research methods even in the face of other tensions and other constraints, and striving to derive products and processes that accommodate the real world, not just the ideal world in certain situations. Research-based designers and designers in general, or developers who work, or at least have one foot planted real firmly in practice, have very little difficulty with that. Researchers tend to idealize things more than we'd like to admit. This is something we can work on. I also have been through a major reorganization at the Open University, and I love the acronym of the group that I've landed in. I think that this is something we could all enjoy working towards. Developing integrated trajectories that feel good. So looking for, in this case, e-learning designs that can foster effective, enjoyable, and efficient learning, and looking at how research-based design and design-based research can actually contribute to that is important. But then what we need to do is share those stories within the community. So within the e-learning community, it's important to, first of all, voice our concerns, our struggles, possibly even our victories, and begin to collaborate maybe on tackling different challenges. And we talked about this yesterday. Maybe this is something that we could be doing within SIGs here at eLearn. Maybe it's even something that could happen across different special interest groups. So to wrap up for today, I think that separate research and development processes are a reality, but they bring with them certain risks. And maybe they can't be avoided at all times, but where possible, I would advocate for robust and integrated approaches where research and development aren't just parallel, but are really tightly integrated to the benefit of both. And I think that this brings along with it some challenges that we should tackle together, and begin to look at how we can, and share our stories about how we can integrate research and development processes in ways that don't dilute the quality of either. In case you're interested in learning more about this kind of stuff, there's some resources available in print, and I'll post this online. There's also plenty of web-based resources that teach more, especially about design-based research. And of course, I'm always open to talk with people about design, so if you're interested, I would be delighted to have a conversation with you. And I believe that we actually even have time to do that right now. So perhaps we can.
Hello, Susan.
Thank
you so much. It was really good.
Thank you.
There's, as you know, I do quite a bit of design-based research myself and supervise quite a bit of it, and then by necessity, I also tend to have to examine quite a bit of it. And one of the questions that I keep on having to ask people who do that is, when you're designing something and then testing what you are designing, how do you protect yourself against finding what you want to find? I'm finding it very hard with, and I'd like you to comment a little, finding it very hard when students come to me and they say, I want to do this research because I want to prove to my boss that my job is necessary.
Yeah.
And I say, you can't do that because you're not protecting yourself against finding what you want to find.
Right. So that's a great question, and I don't have the answers, but I can share with you some of the things that we have done, because I get that, and we've all lived with those challenges. So, like so many things, I think we get by with a little help from our friends, and I think that one thing that can help a lot is to make sure that in a design-based research project, there's enough people who are involved. And preferably that would include the design researcher, but it isn't always feasible, who don't have a stake in the outcome. So of course, if you're looking to make a change on the ground, everybody involved wants to see that change, no question. But if I think about some of the technology projects, especially that I've done, where we go into classrooms then and we see what people actually do, whether our designs degrade gracefully or become lethal mutations, they're never used the way we expect. And that kind of humbling experience can be an amazing tool for redesign if we embrace it as such. But if we're really concerned with seeing it do the thing that we really want it to do, then we don't have an open mind to begin with, and we're not going to be able to make the use of the evaluation findings. So and for theory building, I would emphasize also, especially to students for whom the whole word theory just makes them get all nervous, I would emphasize that finding surprising results is really interesting. And when things don't do what you expect, for some cases, there's because what you expected was really naive, and that needs to be addressed. But maybe it's because the theoretical understanding that you have so far needs tweaking, or maybe it's because the theoretical understanding that we have so far isn't as robust or reliable as we thought it was. So I think that helpful things have to do with having different advisors. In this case, I think it would be advisors on a project, and even a small doctoral student project can have a group of critical friends that you go to once every so often. In Belgium, I'm on a couple of committees where they have an annual review like that, and we just go in and toss our 2 cents once a year. Another one, like I said, not having a stake in the outcomes, being able to feel like I did usable, valuable research, even if the findings aren't what I expected. I can still, and you can do that if you are able to put them to productive use to still make a good change on the ground. So I think those would be at the top of my list of conversations that I would have with students on that topic. Thank you.
Okay, Susan, thank you very much for your presentation.
Thank you very much.